the cursed king of the ancient world, Nebuchadnezzar, and the exile of the Jews. The Babylonian ruler, Nebuchadnezzar II, is renowned in history as one of the mightiest kings of the ancient world. His name is mentioned in the Torah and Islamic literature. He was the one who built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. While the Jews considered him to be insane, Muslims claim he died turning into an ox, while the Babylonians hailed him as the epitome of justice. However, now he is preparing to change the course of history completely, as he plans to destroy the Temple of Solomon and invade Jerusalem. In the year 6005 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar, still in his early 20s, returned to his capital after defeating the Egyptians at Carchemish and eliminating the last remnants of the Assyrians. Upon his return, he received news of his father Nabopolassar's death. He is now the ruler, and a new chapter in his life is about to unfold. He first undertakes the restoration of the Marduk temple and the ziggurats in his country. The people of Babylon, including the king himself, are deeply devout to the ancient pagan gods inherited from Sumer. Marduk is one of their most revered deities. However, new problems arise in the kingdom. Prompted by Egyptian incitement, the Jewish king Jehoiakim rebels against Babylonian rule to gain independence. Nebuchadnezzar plans to crush this rebellion decisively. In 598 BCE, swiftly entering Jerusalem, the king suppresses the rebellion and sends the Jewish king, along with his family, royal officials, warriors, and artisans, into exile. Nebuchadnezzar appoints a new king by changing the name of a Jewish royal member named Matanya after the deportation of this small group and secures his allegiance. However, influenced by Egyptian provocations, Matanya initiates a new rebellion. The Jews do not relent. Nebuchadnezzar assigns his commanders to destroy Jerusalem in 587 BCE to prevent further uprisings. After capturing Jerusalem, the commanders demolish the Temple of Solomon and even the city walls. They kill the king's sons before his eyes, blind the king, and take him in chains to Babylon. Additionally, unlike the previous exile, a significant portion of the common people is also taken to Babylon. Today, the section known as the Wailing Wall, where Jews worship, is the only remaining part of the Temple of Solomon. It has been rebuilt several times, but has been destroyed again by enemies. As a result of the exile and destruction of the Jewish territories, Jerusalem has remained desolate, resembling a widowed woman, as described in Psalm 137. It reads, "If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy." The Babylonian exile of the Jews has had far-reaching consequences that extend to our present day. One of these is the increase in the number of Arabs settling in and around Jerusalem and Palestine following the expulsion of the Jewish population from the region. This situation has been one of the fundamental causes of the Israel-Palestine conflicts today. The Israel-Palestine conflicts are considered the longest-running feud in history, stretching back 2,500–3,000 years. The last generation witnesses to this ancient conflict are us. The name Palestine is first encountered in an inscription commissioned by the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses III around 1190 BCE, referring to a coastal people called the Philistines. However, due to their dubious origins, the region where this people, the Philistines, settled came to be called Palestine, and the subsequent migrations of both Jews and Arabs to the region initiated this historical feud. Interestingly, Jews are believed to be descendants of Abraham, the prophet. Therefore, they are also called Hebrews. The Babylonian exile of the Jews by Nebuchadnezzar has several other significant consequences. The Jews believed in the establishment of their country by King David and the continuity of the Davidic kingdom, never allowing Jerusalem to fall into enemy hands. Furthermore, according to Jewish belief, Jerusalem was the place where God, Yahweh, resided. King David took this place from a tribe called the Jebusites, so Jerusalem is also known as Yerushalayim. David had the city built and attempted to build a temple for the dwelling of God. However, completing this temple was left to his son, the prophet Solomon. In this context, the destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple of Solomon by the Babylonians, along with the exile of the Jews, was a great tragedy for them. They interpreted the situation as punishment from God for their sins. Despite being expelled from a great city like Jerusalem, Babylon was incomparable for the Jews. With its immense temples, libraries, lush gardens, and cosmopolitan structure composed of various peoples, Babylon was more magnificent than they had ever experienced before. King Nebuchadnezzar II had the Hanging Gardens of Babylon built in this city. It is one of the 7 wonders of the world. It is said that Nebuchadnezzar had these magnificent gardens built out of love for his wife, Amytis, who missed the greenery of her homeland. This claim was recorded by the Babylonian priest Erosus and confirmed. However, unfortunately, we do not have archaeological evidence for these gardens beyond the stories told. The historical records do not mention Nebuchadnezzar's wife, Amytis, or any of his other wives. Therefore, we are faced with the question of whether this story is legend or reality. However, we do know that Nebuchadnezzar first rebuilt the famous Tower of Babel, originally built by the Sumerians. The tower was a 7-story building with a base 90 meters wide and 90 meters high. Around the tower, there were priestly palaces, granaries, guest chambers, and a processional way leading to another temple dedicated to the god Marduk called the Exile. Homer described the tower in detail during his journey to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar II was indeed a real architect, and he describes what he did for Babylon as follows. I opened up distant lands, distant mountains, paths from the upper sea to the lower sea, unopened roads, places where movement was impossible, places with no foothold, difficult paths, and waterless journeys. I overcame disobedience, captured our enemies, and enriched the lands and people under our control. Nebuchadnezzar had some of his construction projects inscribed on cylinder seals and buried them, hoping that future kings would discover them. The famous Ishtar Gate was one of these. When Alexander the Great defeated Darius and entered Babylon, he passed through these gates with admiration. These were works rebuilt and beautified by Nebuchadnezzar. This gate was dedicated to the god Marduk. Thus, we understand that Nebuchadnezzar elevated Marduk above all other gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon. Inscriptions honor Nebuchadnezzar with concepts like Marduk's favorite, the king of the universe, having no enemies from horizon to sky. They describe him as the one who organized the great coasts of the earth and restrained the destructive waters resembling the majestic waves of the sea. All this splendor and the idea that the Jewish god Yahweh was defeated by the pagan god Marduk led some Jews to turn from God Yahweh to God Marduk. Here enters another Jewish prophet into our narrative, the prophet Ezekiel. The Old Testament, written over a long period, contains the books of many Jewish prophets. The section on the prophet Ezekiel is one of them. Although it was forbidden for Jews to build a temple other than the Temple of Solomon, according to the book of Ezekiel, Jews in Babylon started gathering for worship in Ezekiel's house. Since these gatherings at Ezekiel's house became formalized, there arose a need to gather in a temple outside the house, and thus the first synagogues came into being. In the face of Babylon's power and cosmopolitan structure, Jews decided to sharpen their rules and increase religious sanctions to avoid assimilation. Indeed, in social psychology, the more social discipline and religious pressure increase, the harder the structure of the group becomes. Again, circumcision became mandatory for Jews during the Babylonian period. Actually, Jews knew circumcision from Egypt. We know from Egyptian texts and hieroglyphs that circumcision practices were depicted. Sometimes it was a medical treatment in Anatolian civilizations and Mesopotamia, while at other times it was a religious ritual. However, the Babylonians did not practice circumcision, and Jews began to use circumcision as a sign to distinguish themselves from other peoples during the Babylonian period. The command to circumcise infants at only 8 days old is for this reason. Severe penalties are imposed in the chapters of Genesis and Exodus of the Torah. Those who are not circumcised will be excluded, unable to marry, and unable to participate in festivals. During this period, for the first time, the Jewish god Yahweh was seen not only as residing in the Temple of Solomon, but also as being omnipresent. Jerusalem was destroyed, and the Temple of Solomon was demolished. Thus, it was understood that Yahweh did not need a place. One of the earliest ideas of a universally dominant God in history developed in this way. The prophet Jeremiah conveyed God's message to the exiles in a letter, urging them to settle in Babylon, build houses, plant gardens, eat their fruit, give their sons and daughters in marriage, and multiply. He advised them to seek the welfare of the city, where they had been sent into exile, and to pray to the Lord for its welfare, for in its welfare they would find their welfare. This letter is considered one of the best summaries of the exile's situation. The implementation of the advice in this letter was seen as essential for Jews to survive as a nation without assimilating. In the books of the Jewish prophets Ezra and Nehemiah, it is written that among the exiles in Babylon, there were male and female singers, slaves, and concubines, and some became wealthy enough to contribute voluntarily. Additionally, it is understood from these books that during this period, Jews attained significant positions in the lives of nobles, including the king's palace. The fact that many settlements in Babylon had Hebrew names is also an important indication that Jews were able to establish their own living spaces. As for what became of Babylon, not long after the death of Nebuchadnezzar in 539 BCE, the famous Persian emperor Cyrus the Great, a rising power, invaded and erased it from the historical stage. The story of the Sumerian civilization had come to an end. Cyrus the Great issued decrees allowing the Jews to return to their homeland, but while some returned, others chose to remain. Those who returned continued to write the Torah, developed the belief in one God, and laid another brick in the foundation of modern religions. That's the whole story. This is the story of how mythology entered religions, who Nebuchadnezzar actually was as a king, and how modern Judaism took shape. We've reached the end of the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you in the next video.